This is an advertisement by BetterHelp. January arrives with a sense of expectation and change. But real change is rarely loud or dramatic.
It's noticing what no longer needs to be there. Thoughts you keep turning over even when they're not helping.
And when you live with those long enough, they can start to feel normal until you pause and see them more clearly. That's where perspective helps. Not fixing yourself, just creating space to understand what's been weighing you down.
Therapy can offer that space, a clearer view of your own patterns and what's worth holding on to. BetterHelp makes starting straightforward. You answer a few questions and they match you with a qualified therapist. If it doesn't feel right, you can switch at any time.
Whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, working to better yourself is something everyone should do. And you don't even need to bulldoze your life to do it. Simply use BetterHelp.
BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/restishistory. That's betterhelp.com/restishistory.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that, do that, do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
Tell them to meet me at Egbert's Stone, near the woods where Somerset meets Wiltshire. Tell them to bring whatever weapons they can find, knives, cudgels, even pitchforks if they have them. Tell them to lift up their hearts and summon their courage. For too long have we lived in fear of the Danes. No longer. At Egbert's Stone, we will stand and fight. For God, for Wessex, for England. That Dominic Sandbrook was an extract from a top new book, Fury of the Vikings, by a top historian, namely yourself. So the latest in your series of books written for children, Adventures in History.
Adventures in Time, Tom.
Adventures in Time, Dominic, sorry. Brilliant stuff. That is exactly how, when I was a child in Wessex, that's exactly the kind of stuff
That's how King Alfred
that
spoke.
I read.
Yeah.
When I learned about King Alfred, because I was devoted to Alfred. I grew up near Wilton, which became the kind of the great dynastic centre for the women of Wessex, and so I felt incredibly proud of Alfred. I kind of felt that he was my king, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be doing this episode. I've been looking forward to it ever since we started doing this podcast.
I'm glad to have stirred such feelings in you, Tom.
I laughed at you when you implied that Alexander the Great was a worthwhile model for young boys and girls. But with this, I completely agree that Alfred is an absolute model, and everyone should try and live like Alfred.
For those people who don't know, I've been doing a series of children's books aimed at people between, 8 and 12 or something. And this one is, as Tom says, called Fury of the Vikings. And Alfred is one of the great characters in it, because there is an argument, isn't there, Tom, that the battle against the Viking, the fight against the Vikings, was the foundational moment in the creation of something called England and Englishness.
Absolutely.
And the idea of Englishness doesn't make any sense unless you understand it as a reaction to the landing of so many boats from Denmark and Norway and whatnot, and the longships. And
I think I would go further than that. So the passage I read, that is Alfred summoning the West Saxons to join him, and they will go on to fight a great battle at Edington. But this is after probably the most famous thing associated with Alfred, which is the burning of the cakes.
Yes.
He's been attacked by the Vikings. He's fled into the marshes of Athelney, and he's gazing into the fire, trying to work out how to defeat the Vikings, and he burns the cakes. And then he goes out and he has this stirring peroration, which Dominic has just written up for us. So it's all great stuff. But I think that the history behind this is actually, I mean, it couldn't be more dramatic. And we've talked quite a lot over the course of this series about whether there are truly decisive moments, whether there are episodes or events that if they'd gone differently, history would have been radically different. And I do think that had Alfred died, had he been captured by the Vikings and executed, or had he fallen in battle, or had he given up and fled, as so many of the other kings of the various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had done, I think the history of England, and therefore of much of the rest of the planet, would be considerably different. I really do think that.
Would there even be somewhere called England? Would that word exist?
That is the question. I mean, I certainly think that the language that we're speaking now would probably not exist. It would be a very different thing. So I think that the reign of Alfred is really, really important. There is a problem, I think, in overhyping Alfred, because that's what the Victorians did. So there's a sense in which our image of Alfred is so strongly mediated through the devotion that the Victorians felt for him. As this kind of flaxen-haired Victorian Christian gentleman, which is very much the image, who basically invented everything.
Didn't he invented clocks, the Royal Navy, books, English.
Oxford University. Yes, I mean, basically everything.
Yeah.
But I do think that he's great. I mean, if the word great means anything, I think Alfred was great. And that word is actually, the association of Alfred with the idea of greatness is it goes quite a long way back. I mean, it goes back to, I think, 13th century. I think it's Matthew Paris who first does that, and then really takes wing with the Tudors. But simultaneously, it's interesting that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is our main source for vast sweeps of early medieval history in Britain, and which basically Alfred started up, when Alfred dies, it doesn't give him any great encomium. I mean, it doesn't kind of cast him as this great figure that we subsequently salute. And I think that reflects the fact that perhaps it required the distance of centuries properly to appreciate the full scale of his achievement.
They don't know what we know. So they don't know that Alfred's heirs, presumably, when they're writing, they don't know that Alfred's heirs are going to go on and build this, they're going to fulfill his dream, as it were. So people who've seen the TV series The Last Kingdom, based on the Bernard Cornwell historical novels, will know that in the series, Alfred is always going on about his dream of England.
Yeah.
And I couldn't resist putting that in my children's book.
Well, also, Dominic, people who've listened to our episode on World Cup of English Kings and Queens, the winner was Athelstan, commonly thought to be the first king of England. That's certainly how we cast him, who is the grandson of Alfred. And deeply shaped by him. Alfred did not feature in the World Cup of English.
We had
Kings
a massive argument about that, didn't we, Tom?
We did, because he was not a king of England. He's a king of Wessex, which is so we should let's get on to Alfred. Let's get on to Alfred's life.
Right. So we should do the Vikings as well. We're going to talk about the Vikings in the second half, aren't we? Because we're going to bring them on stage a hero needs antagonists. And I think Alfred's story does depend on the Vikings, on these sort of gigantic, black-bearded,
or blonde-bearded.
Well, I suppose they would have been blonde-bearded, yeah. But in the Ladybird book that I read when I was little, I'm sure they were black-bearded because all the Anglo-Saxons were blonde. Yes.
Looking like Prince Albert.
But that sort of antagonism, that's what fires your imagination. That's what must have been more fired your imagination, Tom.
Well, it's completely.
The fact that, these terrifying figures with horns, helmets.
So as a child, in the books I read, the Vikings were terrifying. They were terrifying adversaries who would disembowel you or pull your guts out or whatever.
Exactly.
Shoot you full of arrows. And then I kind of graduated to books that said, oh no, that wasn't true at all. These are all,
they're kindly traders.
Fantasies manufactured by monks. And in fact, the wonderful culture that they spread and all this kind of thing. And now I've definitely gone back to, they were terrifying. I mean, their culture was extraordinary, but it was extraordinary in a terrifying way. And I completely agree. The measure of the drama of Alfred escaping the assault on Chippenham, getting to Athelney, winning at Eddington is entirely dependent on the fact that the penalties for defeat were horrendous. Yeah. But as you say, we will come to the Vikings. So we don't have a unitary state of England, do we, in the 9th century?
Competing kingdoms. So you've got Northumbria in the north. You have Mercia, which is the kind of, on paper, looks like the giant because it's kind of sprawling over the Midlands. You've got East Anglia and you've got Wessex, haven't you? And Wessex is the coming
Coming power, yeah.
It's the coming power. The others have all had a moment in the sun, particularly Northumbria and Mercia, but they're in decline. And Wessex, which has kind of been, not exactly, a whipping boy is too strong, isn't it? But Wessex has been a slightly junior kingdom, I would say. Is that fair, Tom?
A slow developer.
Yeah. You won't hear a word against Wessex, of course, because you're basically. Do you ever? So in Chipping Norton, where I live, you can vote for the Wessex Regionalist Party. Presumably, you would vote for them.
Yeah, I think I would. Well, but I'm Mercian as well. My ancestry reaches back to Mercia.
Of course,
so I am an Anglo-Saxon figure. So the Northumbrians, the Mercians, the East Angles, by definition, are Anglians, Angles. Angli, and the Wessex is the kingdom of the West Saxons, so they're Saxon. They essentially speak the same language.
Yeah.
They have the same religion. They have the same kind of foundation myths. So I think they feel a certain kind of kinship, and this will become very important to Alfred. But at the same time, the opportunity to to fight each other is also very important. And basically, they play by rules, I think. I mean, obviously, battles between, say, the Mercians or the West Saxons or whoever are murderous when they get there. But there's the slight element of a kind of seasonal fixture about it. You summon your men, they take time to come there, you go out, you have a battle, you come back. And this is why the Vikings are so devastating, is that they don't play by the rules.
And there's a sort of sense, isn't there? Doesn't the Bede, the venerable Bede, Northumbrian, doesn't he call them the gens Anglorum? Or something like that. So there is a sense that they know that they've got something in common, like their language and customs. And as you say, they've got this sense they've come over the sea, which they had done sort of 200 or 300 years earlier. But there's never been in England, nobody has ever really even thought to do away with the competing kingdoms and have a single state.
There is this title, the Bretwalder. Which is the kind of the supreme king. And essentially, to begin with, it's Northumbrian kings who tend to claim that title, then Mercian ones. And Alfred's grandfather, Egbert, he claims it for Wessex. So 825, there's a great battle where he defeats Beornwulf, the king of Mercia. And the kind of the strain of the Tolkienesque in all this is not coincidental, because of Tolkien was absolutely steeped in all this stuff. So Beornwulf, Beowulf. So as a result of that battle, he is, by 829, he's being hailed as the Bretwalder, the paramount king in England. And he has essentially brought the previously independent kingdoms of Kent, of Sussex, of Essex under his rule. And he's kind of got Mercia to acknowledge a degree of sovereignty. But I think what's interesting in the wake of this is that, oddly, relations between Mercia and Wessex seem to have improved. And it may be that he doesn't force his supremacy too brutally or too kind of aggressively, and actually kind of works to build bridges between Wessex and Mercia. And this will be very important in the story of Alfred.
One thing we haven't mentioned, Tom, just to put this into context, these people are all Christian, aren't they?
Completely Christian. Yes, very, very, very devoutly Christian.
It's really important to them that they're Christian. I mean, that's the big difference, I would say, between... So when I've given school talks and stuff about my books, the children always say the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings look so similar. They wear the same clothes. They have the same swords. What's the difference? I mean, obviously to them, the single biggest difference, apart from any linguistic differences or whatever, is that the Anglo-Saxons are Christians, and that's how they see themselves. And when they talk about the Danes or whatever, what we would call the Vikings, they usually call them the heathens or the pagans, or that's the thing that strikes them about them, isn't it?
Yeah, they take it very seriously. Alfred in particular, the king about whom we know the most, there's an absolute sense that he feels that he has been appointed to the throne by God, and that he will therefore be answerable to God for the state of his kingdom and the people within it.
Yeah.
And I think that you get a sense, definitely with Alfred, again, because we know enough about his character and actually about the physical ailments that over the course of his reign affect him. He seems to have experienced, I think, the kind of the tension between the obligations on him as a Christian and the obligations to defend his people as a kind of, it seems to have induced a considerable strain in him, I think. But it is important to him. the tension between, put up your sword and having to draw your sword. Alfred, I think, is troubled by this throughout his reign. But the other thing, Dominic, I was just going to say is that the church is important to any king in early medieval England because they provide the literate clerks who can draw up the charters and who can provide the kind of the nascent bureaucracy that gives to the various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms their claim to be a part of a kind of broader Christian civilization.
Yeah.
And again, that is very, very important to Alfred because, and it's so important. So he's born in 849 in Wantage in Oxfordshire.
And his father is Ethelwulf.
Yeah, who is the first son to succeed his father as King of Wessex for about a century or more.
Yeah, because that gives you a sense. It was very unstable. I mean, there were different families kind of fighting. There's not one dynasty going all the way through. It's very Game of Thrones. But Ethelwulf succeeds. Alfred, there's no sense that Alfred has been born to be king, though, is there? Because he's not the oldest.
No, he's the youngest of 5 brothers and 1 sister. But I think the measure of how confident Ethelwulf is in the stability of his realm is that, first of all, he sends Alfred off to Rome as a very young boy.
The age of 4.
To be where he's received by the Pope Leo IV, who bestows great honours on him.
Yeah, gives him the sword and the robe of a Roman consul. And that sort of, obviously they are literally living, Tom, in the ruins of the Western Roman Empire. But there's still a sense, isn't there, that there's enormous status and prestige associated with Rome and Romanness. And for a little boy, who
must have been overwhelming.
Do you remember this? Do you remember things that happened when you were 4? Maybe you do if people are always talking about it. You think you do. And I'm sure we don't, it's difficult to delve too much into Alfred's psychology. But for a 4-year-old boy surrounded by servants and bodyguards and whatnot, to be there with the Pope in front of him, the Pope anoints him, I think, puts a hand on his forehead and says, here's all the stuff of a consul. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
It is a big, and rammed home by the fact that 2 years later, Alfred goes to Rome again. Unbelievably, with his father, who has left his one of his sons as kind of regent. He's kind of slightly divvied the kingdom up between 2 of his 2 elder sons. And he goes off on pilgrimage, again taking Alfred. Rome, I think, has a huge impact on Alfred. It's a kind of model of the kind of grandeur that it is possible for a Christian city to possess.
Yeah.
But then coming back from Rome, they go through Francia, so the Frankish Empire that had been founded, brought to greatness by Charlemagne. And they visit the court of Charles the Bald.
Who had a full head of hair.
Yes.
So they called him Charles the Bald, and we don't know if that was a joke or what.
And Ethelwulf marries one of Charles's daughters called Judith. But again, I think the effect of seeing the court of the heirs of Charlemagne, again, must have had a very, very powerful impact on Alfred and given him a sense of what it was to be a Christian king that will never leave him.
So when he gets back, there's one thing we know about him. Well, there's one story that's often told about him as a boy, isn't there, Tom? Which is that, you read this in all the sort of children's sort of storybook accounts of Alfred the Great, that his mother calls all her sons to her side, and she's holding this beautiful illustrated volume of Anglo-Saxon poetry. And she says, I shall give this to the first boy who can read it. And Alfred is absolutely determined to overhaul his older siblings. And he says, how do I, she says, well, you have to learn everything in the book. And the story goes that he borrows the book and he takes it to a monk who's teaching him about the Bible. And the monk explains to him what's in the book. Alfred learns it all by heart. Obviously, dead easy to learn the contents of a book in just a few days, Tom. And then a few days later, he goes to his mother and says, I can tell you what's in the book. And he recites it all. And she gives him the book. And the children's stories say he keeps the book by his bedside for the rest of his life. Such a moving story. But this is in the life of Alfred, isn't it? There's a hint of this in the life of Alfred by his friend and sort of protege and devotee, the Welsh bishop Asa, who clearly worshipped Alfred.
Indisputably, one of the reasons why posterity has such a positive take on Alfred is the fact that Alfred, a bit like Churchill, wrote his He controlled the sources. So Alfred commissions the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but he also commissions this extraordinary life by this Welsh bishop, Asa, which is pretty unique. We don't really have anything comparable. And so we do get this, these anecdotes, and presumably this story must have come from Alfred. And it shows him in a very good light. So surprise, surprise. What it also suggests, though, is that Alfred learns it by the poetry by heart, but he doesn't learn to read.
Well, that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? Yes, because there's no way you can learn to read in 3 days or whatever.
So this is something that I think weighs on Alfred over the course of his childhood and then into his youth, that he can't read. He would like to learn to read. He would like to learn to write. He would like to be able to translate from English into Latin or vice versa, much better than he actually can. And this is something that he's absolute exemplar of adult education. He, over the course of his life, even when he's busy fighting Vikings and issuing charters and building new towns and all kinds of things, all the stuff that Anglo-Saxon kings have to do, he is also committing himself to this learning. And the idea of learning is really, really important to him.
Well, isn't that the key to Alfred the Great's, as it were, greatness? That, what you can see in him as with all Titanic characters in history, you can see in him what you want, because he's both a warrior who literally, leads from the front, stands there at the shield wall, kind of hacking and slashing and all the rest of it. But he's also associated with poetry, with literacy, with education, with religious institutions, all these kinds of things. And that gives him a dimension that just a warlord wouldn't necessarily have.
Yeah. I think that there are lots of Anglo-Saxon kings that are very good at killing people in war. And Alfred is very, very good at killing people in war. And he is perfectly capable of behaving very brutally when he needs to. The idea that he was a Victorian gentleman is not true. You don't become a successful warlord without being able to be very, very brutal. But I think where Alfred is exceptional, and the reason why it's legitimate to think of him as great, if you believe in that kind of concept of great, is he seems to have had an authentic kind of originality of mind and a kind of breadth of vision that enables him to see what you do with your military victories. And Alfred seems to have understood that you can't really have a strong army and therefore a strong kingdom that is capable of keeping enemies at bay without also having the apparatus of learning, so monasteries where monks and nuns are going, and towns that are prosperous and able to generate revenue. So he understands that learning and wealth are basically the key to being a great military leader, and that they're a kind of single package. And he seems to have understood that better than any other king in early medieval England. And I wonder whether one of the reasons why he gets that sense is, firstly, that he's been to the continent. We've talked about that. But also when he comes back to England, it's to a land that is under massive strain. Yeah. And where actually the worldly possessions of his own family and certainly of other royal families are starting to come under strain because they're being pillaged by invaders. And that infrastructure of learning that had sustained Christian civilization in England for centuries is likewise starting to crumble. And this is why Alfred doesn't have the chance to learn in the way that he would have wanted to. And all he can do is learn by heart, because the apparatus of teaching is no longer there. And of course, the reason why both learning and prosperity are coming under attack during Alfred's childhood is because he is coming of age in a period of devastating invasion by the Vikings.
That's a great segue, Tom. A perfect segue. I think we should take a break, and we should return after the break with the Vikings and Alfred's struggles against the Vikings. See you in a minute.
This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel
your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
This episode is brought to you by the Financial Times. I think we both agree, Dominic, that in the clamour of countless voices competing to break the news and telling you the what, the who, and the where on these stories, there's often something missing, isn't there?
There is, Tom, because I think to get a true understanding of any story, you really need to know why. Take FT journalism. It goes deeper, providing the insight, analysis, and perspective to help you see the whole story and truly understand the issues that matter. Why did it happen? Why is it important? And why will it matter? I've got a brilliant example. So they had an article recently, a fascinating article about why populism became popular. And this Financial Times article absolutely delved into that. It was so interesting.
And does it nail it?
Yeah, it nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. And it really made me look at populism in a new light.
Well, if you're interested in the why, we have good news.
Yes, listeners to The Rest is History can save more than 40% on an annual digital subscription to the Financial Times by visiting ft.com/history. For the why, Financial Times. Now, this episode of The Rest is History is sponsored by our friends at Unheard, the online magazine that encourages independent thinking. And as it happens, I've just written an article for Unheard all about the Vikings, talking about their reputation today and the way in which we should tell their stories to children. So when I was writing my book, there were lots of gory bits. And to forestall any talk of the dreaded sensitivity readers, I read bits to children's school groups and so on. The children generally loved them, except there was one little girl I always remember who sort of frowned and shook her head. And afterwards she came up to me and she looking very serious and she's still shaking her head. And she said, I said, what's the trouble? And she said, there wasn't enough beheading. If you're rewriting it, put in more deaths, please. So the future of the British nation is clearly in great hands. Now, if you want to read more from Unheard, there is a new special offer, and it's been running since Bonfire Night for listeners to The Rest is History. So you can enjoy Unheard every day. It's only £1 for 3 months, £1, and it runs this week only, the offer. So normally Unheard would cost you £1 a week, but this is just £1 for 3 months. So go to unheard.com/rest. That's unheard.com/rest to claim your subscription now. The raiders charged up the beaches of Lindisfarne like a storm from the depths of hell. The first monk they met on the path leading up from the shore, they hacked to the ground without a word, an axe splintering his skull in a moment. Then they raced on up the slope, their swords eager for slaughter. More monks came towards them, their hands raised to beg for mercy. The Vikings cut them down where they stood. Blood splattered over the turf. Now they were into the monastery, crashing through the doors, roaring and howling with diabolical rage. They pulled down the crosses and smashed open the tombs. They piled up the holy vessels and stamped on the relics. They tore off the altar cloth, ripped up the Bibles and dragged out the desks. And all the time, Tom, they were laughing, a chorus of cruel and savage joy.
Ooh,
so
the rotters.
That is the raid on Lindisfarne in the year 793, often taken in most sort of general histories of the Vikings. That's always taken as the kickoff.
the exciting moment when they explode into the pages of history. So that was obviously a reading from a wonderful new children's book called Fury of the Vikings by myself.
Yeah, very good.
But
Good.
Tom, actually, that's not the first time they had pitched up.
No, so as early as kind of the mid 8th century, so kind of 750, 753, you're getting chroniclers in the Isle of Thanet describing Danish raiders as a kind of disease that induces madness and death.
Yeah.
And the Vikings seem to have been raiding the southern coast of England.
They disgraced themselves in Dorset, didn't they?
They do, yes.
4 years earlier.
Yes, the Isle of Portland.
Yeah.
And they turn up and a local reeve, a kind of royal official, thinks that that they're the peaceable traders of 1960s historiography.
Exactly. Come and talk to me about multiculturalism and your lovely jewelry.
There goes his head.
Yeah.
And you would expect, of course, the Channel is the easiest for ships to get to. You follow the line of the North Sea coast. So it's not surprising that Kent and the south coast of England are starting to be raided through this period. But Lindisfarne is a shock to everyone because, of course, it's the shrine of St. Cuthbert, very much a friend of the show.
So it's it has a genuinely, dare I say, sacral place, Tom.
It's beyond sacral, Dominic. I mean,
in the hearts of Englishmen.
It certainly does. And as we will see, Cuthbert has a great hold on
He does
Alfred.
Indeed, yeah. So the Vikings, I mean, obviously they are raiders and traders from what are now Denmark, I suppose Norway, to some extent Sweden, though I think the Swedes are probably going east rather than west. But they are, they have always, almost certainly, they've been coming for a long time to trade. The North Sea has been a lake.
Yeah, a lake. Yeah.
But what seems to have happened, doesn't it, in the sort of mid 8th century, is that the Vikings become what we call the Vikings. The Norsemen become emboldened. They become more aggressive. There's more stuff for them to steal.
Yeah, so Lindisfarne is very rich.
Yeah.
And obviously once they've descended on Lindisfarne, purloined it, the news of that gets around. And from that point on, essentially, all the strongholds of wealth in England, monasteries, royal centres, whatever, are kind of sitting ducks.
And it's worth sort of saying, I think, why do they come? Why bother going to England? The answer is that England is very rich. England is rich and settled and stable. It has all this farmland, which frankly they don't have in Norway.
Yeah, to begin with, they're not settling necessarily. I mean,
No.
and the thing also is that with their ships, they can kind of glide up rivers. So every major river is like a kind of dagger pointed at the vitals of England, and they can glide up and just grab stuff and then go. The mark of the escalation is when they start to overwinter.
So that's about 850, isn't it?
So 850, they winter on the Isle of Thanet, which is the kind of running joke in 1066 and all that all invasions begin in the Isle of Thanet. So that's at the very corner of Kent.
So it's not just they're going to hit your town, they're going to hit your monastery and then disappear. They're coming and they are staying.
They're starting to think, we'll put down roots here over winter and we'll, in the long run, try and grab land and entire kingdoms.
Yeah.
And they seem, so the Isle of Thanet in Kent, Wessex is vulnerable. After they've overwintered there, they strike into Wessex and they get annihilated. A great battle in Surrey. Such an odd thing to say, a great battle in Surrey on the golf course. But it was described as the greatest slaughter on a heathen army that we ever heard of until this present day. And that's being written in the time of Alfred. So, that's even by comparison with Alfred's victories. So I think one of the reasons why Wessex comes under less strain than the other kingdoms, despite the fact that in a way it's absolutely in the path of all these fleets coming over the North Sea, is that they do put up a good showing, and that the memory of this great slaughter at a place called Aclea is remembered by the Vikings. And so they go after other softer targets.
Yeah. I mean, there's a sense, isn't there, sometimes in the sort of popular imagination, the Anglo-Saxons, you definitely see this in TV series, the Anglo-Saxons are sort of weedy, foppish monks, and the Vikings are terribly fierce, brilliant fighters. But the Vikings at first are not terribly good at pitched battles because they're raiding parties. They're not armies. And they don't do sieges particularly. They're not very good at sieges at first. So the Anglo-Saxons are not...
The Anglo-Saxons are not weedy.
No, exactly.
The Anglo-Saxons are very, very keen on fighting. They're very good at fighting, but they are not suited to the kind of warfare that the Vikings bring. Because as we said in the first part, they, you have to raise armies from the shires. You have to have meeting points. So that the passage we opened with Egbert Stone, set up by Egbert, Alfred's grandfather, this is a meeting point. But if you've got, a Viking ship gliding up the river and a great fat monastery, they're just going to grab it and hair off before the local troops can be summoned from all the various corners.
It's that point you made about not fighting by the rules.
Yeah,
the Vikings don't follow the rules.
But obviously, the more treasure you get, the richer you become, the more troops you can attract, the larger and larger you become. And this is the problem. It just becomes, it's a kind of escalating danger. And it's happening so quickly that the apparatus of these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms is inadequate to cope with it. But I don't think it's no sense that any of the Anglo-Saxon kings are weedy.
But the Anglo-Saxon, so interestingly, the one that they attack most successfully first, which is Northumbria, is divided. So it's always the way. When you're divided, that attracts outsiders. And I think it's that's Alfred's genius in a way, is that he prioritizes the idea of unity and, his idea of sort of Englishness, which is the sort of Bernard Cornwell fantasy Alfred.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense that's exactly the way that you would fight off these raiders who are sort of striking without warning.
Yeah. So by 865, you've had these raiders coming for decades and they're starting to accumulate more and more people. You get what in Old English is called the Mikkelheven Hera, a vast heathen, vast pagan army. And there's a great book called Viking England by Thomas Williams, who defines a Hera, an army, as actually being a large group of thieves working together, which I think is maybe a slightly more accurate description of it. But so they overwinter in East Anglia, where there's a king, Edmund, who basically buys them off, gives them a load of horses, and they go galloping off up Ermine Street, the old Roman road that leads to York. And they just ride straight into York because the Northumbrian kings have no idea.
Well, there's two Northumbrian kings who've fallen out with each other, aren't there? Aella and Osbert. And Aella, ultimately, who meets this famous fate.
Yes.
So I was saying in the first half, giving talks to school children about the Vikings, they always ask the same kind of 4 or 5 questions. So one of them is horned helmets, obviously.
Yeah.
But another one is a boy, and it'll always be a boy with death in his eyes, will say, did they do the blood eagle? Because Aella is the person who supposedly falls victim to this.
The Bloodhorn.
So there's the guy who's meant to have done it, one of the leaders of the great heathen army, has the absolutely splendid name of Ivar the Boneless.
Yeah.
And nobody knows.
But his brothers are almost as good, aren't they?
There's Halfdan white shirt.
And Hubba.
Hubba. I think Hubba is...
Hubba is funnier.
But Ivar the Boneless, he may have had some kind of, we don't know. Some historians think he may have had brittle bone disease, or he may have had, who knows, spina bifida, or is it a mistranslation?
It's so suffused with myth, isn't it?
It is.
Because they're meant to be the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ragnar Hairpants, who
killed a dragon wearing some hairy trousers.
where he's rolled in snow and made kind of... frozen all the fur, and then the serpent wraps itself around him and dies.
Exactly.
So that's basically the kind of the level of probability that we're...
Well, hold on, Tom. In my version of the story in the children's book, this absolutely happened and Ragnar is real.
But also there's a medieval epic, and this is centuries after it, that says that Ragnar gets chucked into a pit of snakes by Aella. Anyone who's seen the Kirk Douglas film, The Vikings, this is one of the key plot motors. And so this, I think, what is it, 13th century, 12th century, that story?
They want revenge.
So they want revenge, and so they capture Aella, who's tried to get York back. He and all the lads have piled in. They get cornered, they get captured, and supposedly, according to a 13th century epic, Ivar and his brothers had the eagle cut into Ella's back, then all his ribs severed from the backbone with a sword, so that his lungs were pulled out. And this is the blood eagle, and it looks like, he's got these kind of bloody wings.
Sadly, Tom, this may not be true.
indeed, because a century earlier, a Danish writer with the brilliant name of Saxo Grammaticus says that the eagle is actually carved into Aela's back, and they then rub salt into it, don't they?
Yeah, which is in its way, I mean, it's better, but it's still probably quite unpleasant.
And that seems likelier because you have 11th century verse at the court of Knut.
Yeah.
So the Danish king who becomes king. Yeah, of Waves fame. Where again they say that this eagle is inscribed onto the back of the king, or it could conceivably mean that Ivar has an eagle tear at Aela's back.
Yes,
so he has a kind of pet eagle that rips him out.
But either way, Tom, you've got a bloke with no bones
doing something eagle related,
doing something absolutely unspeakable and eagle related to somebody else, while his brothers are looking on and cackling through their beards. I mean, it's great scenes.
Great stuff. Hubba roaring with laughter. So it's all very, very frightening. And obviously this isn't good news for the Northumbrians, because they've lost their kings. They get a tame puppet king, a kind of quisling put over them. And then they go off and invade Mercia. And this is where Alfred enters the story as a warrior, because the first known example of him riding to war is to join the Mercians. And Alfred's wife is a Mercian.
Yes. Her name is
Aelswith.
Aelswith, exactly, yes.
And they go off to Nottingham, where the Vikings have kind of built themselves a fort, and they get rebuffed. They can't attack it, and they don't know what to do. Again, it's because the Vikings aren't playing by rules. Under the terms of traditional sporting, Marquis of Queensberry rules, Vikings are supposed to come out and have a fight, and they don't. So it's all a little bit inglorious there. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle has this brilliant, there occurred no serious fighting there. So it was a score draw.
Right, yeah.
And it may be telling that this is the same year that Alfred marries Aelswith, his Mercian. So there's clearly a sense, I think, that the West Saxons and the Mercians are aware that this is a very grievous threat, and they need to completely bury their difference.
Well, after this, there's another example of Viking poor behavior, Tom. Because some people may remember that you'd said they were given a load of horses by Edmund, the king of East Anglia, when they arrived. He'd bought them off. Yeah. They then pitch up back in East Anglia and they say, actually, we'll have your kingdom.
We'll have the lot, please.
Yeah, we'll have the lot. Edmund resists, doesn't he? He says, I'm not going to...
Well, we don't really know.
Yeah, but all we're
told is that he dies, that there's a battle and he dies.
But later on, it was said they captured him, they tie him up, and they fire arrows at him so that he's prickly like a hedgehog.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lovely image. And then eventually, supposedly they're firing arrows at him and he's just there.
He still doesn't die.
Yeah, he's talking about Jesus. He's just shouting, talking about Jesus the whole time. And they fire arrows. He won't shut up. So eventually they cut his head off. Isn't that right? They cut his head off and throw it into the woods.
They chuck it into a bramble patch.
That's it.
In the middle of a wood.
Yeah.
And then they gallop off, kind of roaring with laughter as you would with such thing. Then subsequently, a peasant is walking through the wood and he hears this voice going, hick, hick, hick. And he's not drunk, because hick is Latin for here.
Yeah.
And he goes over, and there is King Edmund's head being guarded by a giant wolf.
Fantastic stuff.
And I don't know if you saw on Twitter over Halloween, there was somebody had dressed up as a wolf with St. Edmund's head as a Halloween costume.
Really?
Yeah, it was an excellent costume.
That is a good costume. And of course, that, Tom, is the origin of Bury St. Edmunds, the place, isn't it?
It is. Although it's not about the burying of St. Edmunds, obviously, because Bury is the burr, which we'll come to in due course of town.
But, so if you have been moved by this story, get yourself down to Bury St. Edmunds.
Well, so Francis Young, who we had on the show talking about
the occult,
the occult, big fan of Edmund, and he is convinced that Edmund's tomb still lies under the tennis courts at Bury St. Edmunds.
Really?
Which would be very exciting.
He should do a Philippa Langley and try and dig up the tennis court.
I think he's gagging to. He's absolutely desperate to do that. But basically, you're right that the death of Edmund gets kind of hyped up by a monk called Abbo of Fleury, who's writing in the late 10th century, he's obviously aware that what he's writing is unlike, there might be a bit of doubt about it, because he's very keen to say, I heard it from this guy, who heard it from this guy, who heard it from this guy. But basically, he's casting him as being like Christ. This is his passion. And so Edmund becomes a very, very significant saint throughout the Middle Ages.
Yeah, whether or not it's true, the fact of the matter is now that the Vikings, who decades before had just been pillagers, they have taken Northumbria, they have taken East Anglia, they have reduced Mercia to a kind of client state that they can crush at will.
Yeah.
And suddenly Wessex
It's really vulnerable.
is just sitting there ripe for taking.
Yeah, well, so it seems. So 870, which is the year that Edmund dies, the Vikings go off and attack Wessex, and they attack Reading.
Yeah.
And there they capture Reading, but they have a foraging party that gets wiped out by the local ealdorman, the local earl, a man called Athelwulf. And this inspires Athelred, who is Alfred's elder brother, the fourth of his brothers, to have become king. And the other three have basically all kind of, they've been worn out by the challenge of leading Wessex in this very troubled time. So he and Alfred go and try and recapture Reading, are defeated, are hurled back. Athelwulf is killed. It looks an absolute disaster. The West Saxons are kind of having to cross and recross the Thames to try and escape the Vikings.
They're basically just fighting constant battles around the M4. Aren't they?
Exactly. Service stations along the A4. Yeah. But they do win a great victory. So shortly after this, in early January 871, they win a great victory, fighting around a single thorn tree. So it comes pretty called Ashdown.
Yes.
And Alfred, it is said, takes the lead in this. He charges like a wild boar up a hill.
Well, this is Assa's version, though, isn't it?
It is.
Assa basically downplays Alfred's brother and says he was too busy praying. He was late for the battle because he was praying. Yes. Alfred's roaring and charging into battle and all this stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Not a kind of boring person, but a wild, aggressive pig.
So in 871, Athelred dies, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Alfred's brother.
Alfred becomes king, and Athelred has sons. He has two boys, but there's no question of them succeeding.
No,
because this is
be bonkers in the current conditions.
It would.
Not least because there's another Viking force now, isn't there? So there's a second Viking horde that has sailed up the Thames called the Great Summer Army, and that's led by a man called Guthrum. Yes, so Guthrum is basically, we know so little about Guthrum. It's so disappointing when you look at the sources.
Great
because
name,
in all the kind of tales and legends, Guthrum is the antagonist par excellence, isn't he? You sort of, so in I think it's probably the Ladybird book or something that I read when I was about 10. Guthrum was a massive man, 10 feet tall, really wide, massive beard.
Horns on his helmet.
Absolutely. The horn, multiple horns on his helmet. Tattooed, just a figure of, just a brilliant antagonist. And he's going to be the person whose destiny is linked with Alfred's.
Yeah. Yes, and almost straight away, Alfred is, the moment he's become king, he's desperately trying to fight the Vikings off. So the Vikings defeat him at Wilton. So the place very near where I grew up. And Alfred buys them off. But you know that they're going to be back. And the only reason really that they're not launching a full-blown invasion of Wessex is because they're now starting to move in on Mercia. They start overwintering in Mercia, huge, great camps. The archaeology is really interesting. They found, evidence basically for that thousands of people were staying here. And the one at Repton.
Oh, yes, there's a famous tomb, isn't there?
Yes. So Repton, it was a necropolis for the Mercian kings, kind of a crypt where the Mercian kings were buried. So very, very, dare I say, sacral.
Yeah.
Very, very significant, an emblem of Mercian royal power and status. And so the Vikings go and build a massive, great camp there. So utter humiliation. And they found an incredible grave there where a boar tusk had been placed where the genitals would have been. So presumably this guy had been castrated, disemboweled in battle, and round his neck he wore the hammer of Thor.
Well, some people think he could have been Ivor the Boneless, Tom.
Yes. So,
I mean, wouldn't that be a nice twist?
And maybe that's where
the bonelessness meant
comes from.
Yeah. So just what you're saying about the camps. Now that actually makes us think slightly differently, perhaps, about that Viking horde, because the Viking horde is not just blokes with beards and non-horned helmets. There's almost certainly women and children with them, and camp followers and
blacksmiths.
Yeah.
Making swords and all kinds of stuff.
So when you read some of the descriptions by modern historians of these Viking hordes and armies, they will say, you know what, if you'd actually seen them, it's a combination of a huge group of lads kind of tooled up for battle, but it's also got the slight atmosphere of maybe, and this sounds a bit bonkers, kind of slightly rock festival atmosphere in the background.
Yeah, I mean, a very violent one.
Very violent one. very muddy.
Violent one.
People in tents, though. There probably would have been music. There would have been a lot of drinking. A combination between a combination between an army, a refugee camp, a rock festival, you know, a stag do that's gone horribly wrong.
I mean, probably not a good place to be a local woman, or indeed a monk, or indeed probably anyone, unless you're a massive Viking lad. In which case, it's obviously it's brilliant. And of course, there are this is the plot of the Bernard Cornwell novels, is that English-speaking Angles or Saxons can sign up to this. They can go over to them.
Well, almost certainly, as Romano-Britons would have done with the Anglo-Saxons generations earlier.
So this is all very bad news for the Mercians, and the king of Mercia, a guy called Burgred, eventually has enough, and he decides he's off, and he goes off and lives in Rome.
He does a Prince Harry. He doesn't he?
Well, I think he's under slightly more pressure than Prince Harry, to be fair to him. And the Vikings set up a guy called Ceolwulf, who gets roundly abused by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a foolish thane.
I called him a mean and Weasley man in my children's book, Tom.
But Dominic, we don't know.
I made it up. I mean, he must have been to have. He's a collaborator.
Well, or the alternative is, the Vicious argument. That he's struggling to do his best to maintain a kind of fig leaf of Mercian independence.
When we do that podcast about Marshal Pétain, Tom, are you going to be getting all this stuff out?
He basically gets given Gloucester.
Yeah.
And there is evidence that he and Alfred actually form a kind of alliance. So they found a coin minted in London. London is a Mercian centre, showing Alfred and Ceolwulf on it, portrayed as two Caesars, implying that there's a kind of, they have an equal dignity, which doesn't equate with the way that subsequently in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, sponsored by Alfred, he is dismissed as this kind of idiot, because by this point, Alfred is quite keen to take over Mercia and bring it under his authority. So that, again, I think is another example of the way in which Alfred is not this perfect gentleman.
Well, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, just talking about the sources, if we had an equivalent to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle written from outside Wessex.
Well, we do have Mercian accounts, but they don't write about this particular period.
But they're not as detailed, are they? They're not as colourful. So you don't get. But if you did have the equivalent, they might present a very different portrait of Alfred. They might see Alfred as a Wessex imperialist, I suppose.
In due course, Alfred will go and capture London. Yeah. And, there was evidently fighting in London, but it's not entirely clear who Alfred was fighting. People tend to assume it was the Vikings, but it may well have been the Mercians because it was a Mercian city. So I think that there is a sense that Alfred is he does acknowledge Ceolwulf as an authentic Mercian king, but he also, of course, recognizes that Ceolwulf is basically, he's so weak. He's so much a puppet that he's not really going to be much use, and that Wessex, therefore, is pretty much on its own. It's the last kingdom.
So Alfred, let's get to 878, Tom. Yeah. Alfred has been king now for 7 years, and so far he's done a solid job of staving off the Vikings, hasn't he? By a combination of fighting and buying them off.
Yeah.
He's preserved, I suppose you would say, the status quo. Is that fair?
Yeah, pretty much. And he's had a lucky storm. So there's a great storm off the Dorset coast, and it said 120 Viking ships are lost. So he's just about holding them out.
Yeah.
And he gets them to, he signs a treaty. They swap hostages. The Vikings withdraw. It looks as though Wessex is, it's just about keeping its head above water. And it's winter. And by and large, you don't fight in winter.
Yeah.
And of course, you have Christmas in winter, very, very holy feast. Alfred, very devout, celebrates it. And then you have the 12 days of Christmas, which, we have celebrated in our own humble way, haven't we, with our episodes. And Alfred is celebrating 12th night at Chippenham, which is in North Wiltshire. And it's a great royal centre. And this is a holy feast day. He signed the peace treaty. It's the dead of winter. He assumes that everything's going to be fine, but the Vikings are cheats.
Shocking,
said it before. We'll
behavior.
say it again. Yeah. They do not play by the rules. and they launch an ambush. And this is absolutely standard Viking behavior. They love to attack people on Christian feast days because they know that the likelihood is that their enemies will be off guard. And this is exactly what happens. And I think you could say that it's on or around 12th night in 878. Alfred is taken wholly by surprise. He cannot stand and fight because if he does, he'll be killed. So he flees into the dark, and the whole future of England is hanging by a thread.
Oh, it's so exciting, Tom.
Hanging by a thread.
It's a very dramatic moment.
And if that thread had been cut, we'd all be speaking Danish.
Oh, I like Denmark, actually, Tom, to be fair.
Yeah,
brilliant tradition of kind of design.
Lego and herring. And
yeah,
it'd be wonderful. But it didn't happen. And as we will find out in Thursday's episode, Alfred will go on to prove himself the king least likely to win the Great British Bake Off, but very much the king most likely to save a kingdom that is tottering on its very foundations.
Well, that's all to come on Thursday, isn't it, Tom? And of course, if you're a member of the Rest is History Club, you can listen to that right now. But before you do, we should end on a proper cliffhanger with a reading from Fury of the Vikings of that's what happened that night in Chippenham. So the scullion boy has just gone outside, Tom, to relieve himself in the dead of night. And he's seen the Danes coming. Do you want to know what happens next?
I'd love to.
As his desperate yells broke through the silence, the men in the hall were shaking themselves awake and calling for their weapons, and the servants were running to bar the doors, and the first axe blows were thundering into the timbers. It was all too late, for already the heathens were inside the hall, and people were screaming and shrieking, and there were bodies on the ground, and blood was soaking into the rugs on the floor. But when it was all over, and Guthrum walked in through the shattered doors, picking his way past the heaps of bodies and puddles of gore, one body was missing. For somehow, against all the odds, Alfred had escaped.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.